You know, considering where this movie goes, it's weird they decided to go with the plot they went with, considering they had a world of opportunities. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to my channel. Today we're talking about a newer release, Jurassic World Dominion. Before we begin, let me know in the comments what your thoughts on this movie were, if you already saw it, or if you are planning on seeing it. And make sure to hit that thumbs up button if you like these reviews, as it helps me out immensely by getting my content out there. And if you're new here, I hope you consider hitting that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with more movie-related content on a near-daily basis. But let's not waste any more time and let's talk about Jurassic World Dominion. This takes place 4 years after the destruction of Isla Nublar, and now dinosaurs live and hunt alongside humans all over the world. This fragile balance will reshape the future and determine whether humans are to remain the apex predators on a planet they now share with history's most fearsome creatures. Colin Trevorrow returns to direct this after having only written Fallen Kingdom, and this has finally arrived after a delay due to the pandemic, in an interesting twist of fate, as this is the second time the third film in a Jurassic trilogy had some very notable production issues, after Jurassic Park 3 was also known for its own trouble production. And this sees the Jurassic World trilogy go down the route of several major franchises in a trend that became pretty popular the same year Fallen Kingdom was released, that being the inclusion of legacy characters. After an absence from the first two Jurassic Worlds outside of an Ian Malcolm cameo in Fallen Kingdom, Malcolm, Sattler, and Grant, all from the original Jurassic Park, return in prominent roles once more here, with of course Jeff Goldblum, Laura Dern, and Sam Neill all reprising their roles. And going into this, that was essentially my only level of excitement for this, to be honest. While a lot of people praise the first Jurassic World as the best Jurassic sequel period, I think it's just okay, and nothing I really need to revisit. And I really did not like Fallen Kingdom, with both movies kind of getting a little worse for me on their most recent rewatches. And given how much Fallen Kingdom especially rubbed me the wrong way and where it left things off, anything that wasn't involving the three legacy characters, I honestly couldn't have cared less about going in, even with the setup of dinosaurs and humans finally living together once more. I was mentally checked out of the story. I was not a fan of these characters. I never appreciated the overly serious, stiff tone the Jurassic World movies went for. I found the dialogue to be as clunky as anything, and I figured it would just be more of the same here, except on a bigger scale, and we'd also get some characters we know and love as well, and that might give things some sort of boost. And while I was right about a couple of things about this, to my surprise, I was a little wrong regarding how I felt overall about this. In fact, I actually didn't mind this movie, and even as it sat with me, I think I can safely say, despite it being the worst reviewed of all the Jurassic Park and World movies, it's actually my favorite of this new trilogy. Now, I wouldn't necessarily call this a good movie. It's still ultimately just alright, and it does have its issues, which we'll get into. And it's still not the movie I'd ideally turn on if I'm in the mood for something Jurassic Park related. But I thought this was definitely an improvement over the other two movies, and it made for an experience that I actually didn't mind. So let's start with what I liked, and the thing that I figured I would like the most wound up being what I enjoyed the most about this. When it comes to the three legacy characters, they are easily the most compelling part about this movie. They mostly still have that same charm to them, they're written in a way that makes them feel consistent with their original appearances, their chemistry still as great as ever, and more importantly, we regain, to a degree, that sense of fun that I feel has been missing from the Jurassic World movies. The big thing that bugged me about most of the Jurassic Park and World sequels is that they went for a much darker tone than the original movie. With the first film, you took the situation seriously and you felt the emotional stakes of the situation, but the film knew how to have fun, excitement, and that sense of wonder and awe. And those were mostly lost with each successive movie, especially once we got to Jurassic World. And there are still issues on that front, which we'll get to, but when we saw the legacy characters, a little bit of that magic returned. Now, they're in one subplot that runs concurrent to the one with our Jurassic World characters, and the one primarily driving this storyline forward is Sattler. While she and Grant are together through the entire storyline, with Malcolm playing mostly a supporting part throughout it, Sattler is the one leading the charge. the conflict that's central to their story. She's the first to notice there's more than meets the eye. She has the most personal stakes in what's going on, and she's the one planning things out, making the decisions, and so on. And Laura Dern, as always, is great. As is Jeff Goldblum, bringing back a lot more of that quirkiness that was missing from Malcolm when we saw him in The Lost World. A little bit of it feels more like Jeff Goldblum just leaning into all of his Jeff Goldblumisms, as he's definitely in on the joke more these days of how his mannerisms are. But it still feels like something closer to the Malcolm we know and love from the original, and it brings a lot of fun comedic relief. Now, Sam Neill felt like he was just there at times, truthfully. He plays an active role in the events, and he's there every step of the way with Sattler. But while he's charming as always as Grant, and it's good to see him, and he does take part in several big moments, he didn't really have a standout sequence the way the other two did. Not that he was completely wasted, but still. Though overall, it was still good to see him. And what was cool with bringing everyone back was that this actually tied up some loose ends that were from the original 3 movies. There were several decisions made in those films that, while it didn't set the Jurassic Park fanbase into uproar, were noted as leaving people at least mildly puzzled as to what happened, myself included. And this at least circled back around to all that to give some sense of closure to those respective plot points. And while it's so obviously just pulling on the nostalgia heartstrings, I still felt the way the original trio were incorporated into all this, while a little bit of a stretch, which we'll also get into, was overall heartfelt, and it gave the film some much needed sincerity. So in one storyline you have Sattler, Grant, and Malcolm investigating Biosyn, which is the rival corporation from the first movie run by Dodgson, now played by Cameron Scott. And to me, this was by far the better storyline, simply for seeing all the legacy characters. And I also did like Mahmoud Atiye as the head of communications for Biosyn. He's a close advisor to Malcolm, and I found him to be very charismatic and likable. Now, the writing for this storyline overall had its issues, but for what it was, I found it engaging. Now, the other storyline involving Owen and Claire, played once more by Chris Pratt and Bryce Dallas Howard, was just fine. This involves a rescue mission as the clone granddaughter of Hammond's associate Maisie from the last film gets kidnapped by Biosyn mercenaries along with the clone daughter of the Raptor Blue, and they attempt to track them down. Now, while this time around I wasn't bothered as much by Owen and Claire as I was in the last 2 movies, this part of the story was just not as interesting to me, primarily because it does play into the general problems I've had with the other 2 Jurassic World films. Owen and Claire are still ultimately not all that interesting of characters. They're way too overly serious rather than actually likable. Part of the story's emotional core involves Owen making a promise to Blue, again, going back to my criticisms of Fallen Kingdom, where it essentially reverses course on the themes of the original movie. But despite all that, in the end, it was okay enough this time around. For one thing, there's plenty of action in this part of the movie, and it's not all just CGI explosions and destruction. But there were times where it was actual choreographed fight scenes, and for what they were fun enough. Not amazing, but entertaining enough, and at the very least, it keeps up the one thing the other 2 Jurassic Worlds were good at, and that's being solid enough popcorn entertainment. But the most entertaining aspect of this storyline by far is the inclusion of DeWanda Wise as the pilot Kayla, who assists Owen and Claire getting into Biosyn. She was very charismatic, she was the only sense of comedic relief in this entire part of the story, and she looked like she was having an absolute blast with this, and she plays just as active of a role in the main events that it brought things up considerably. And what I appreciated in general about this film was that it at least attempted to have some more fun than what we normally got in the other 2 Jurassic Worlds. While it still has tonal issues where it can be a little too serious for its own good, it at least definitely tried cutting the tension in several instances, especially in the way characters would make little quips in between all the action. I know that's something that not everyone's a fan of in modern blockbusters, as that's especially a recurring criticism of the MCU in particular, but I think a nice balance of these more lighthearted moments goes a long way at trying to give us some balance of emotions, especially because the ultra gritty, overly serious tone of those first 2 Jurassic World movies did not work. Taking yourself so seriously does not automatically equate to being emotional or profound, so it seemed like the lesson was finally learned here. And I think if you go into this movie with your brain turned off and you just want to see spectacle mixed with some nostalgia, this will make for an enjoyable enough time, in my opinion. And even though you can make that same argument for the other 2 Jurassic World, and there are those who enjoy them simply for that, I feel this has a little more of a personality than those movies, so that it at least works better in that regard. Especially since the dialogue this time is nowhere near as clunky or as awkward as either of those movies, which was a big criticism I had for them. This time, a lot of it actually sounds believable. But that doesn't mean the writing's still great overall. Again, as I said, when it comes to its handling of the returning Jurassic World characters, they're probably the least interesting aspect of this film. There's still absolutely zero chemistry between Chris Pratt and Bryce Dallas Howard, and as I said, while they're not quite as bad here this time around, I really do hope this is the last we see of them. This is supposed to be the last of all these movies anyway, but you know they'll give us some new trilogy in like another 5-10 years. Especially with the way this has been doing well at the box office, so it's coming, but just make it about newer characters, please. Then, going back yet again to the Fallen Kingdom problem of making it totally okay now that humans messed with nature and dinosaurs living among humans is actually the good thing, we actually barely explore the world part of Jurassic World, and we don't see the true repercussions of these characters going through with their plan to save the dinosaurs from the previous movie. We don't see those horrible consequences. Instead, we switch to a plot about killer locusts orchestrated by Biosyn, which goes back to why I said the writing for the legacy character story isn't exactly perfect. You bring back the original trio, and it's great to see them, and they're mostly utilized in an effective enough way from an emotional standpoint, but you bring them in to deal with things that are really out of their area of expertise. Like, at no point in any of the other Jurassic Park movies did they mention they dealt with locusts, so that was a bit of a stretch. On top of the fact that killer locusts are not what people go to see Jurassic Park for. Like, from a thematic standpoint, they add absolutely nothing, as unlike dinosaurs, locusts are already around today. And those who go for the more pure entertainment aspect, you go for the dinosaurs wreaking havoc, especially for the creativity that can go into these scenes. And there were a few moments where the dinosaurs were doing their thing here that were cool, but most of the monster movie aspect part of this movie involved the locusts just causing destruction, and you really can't do as much creatively with just swarms of CGI locusts, and you feel that here. Outside of like one moment towards the beginning, a lot of these sequences just felt like generic CGI destruction, and it was just a baffling choice that we went with this for the final chapter of this trilogy than something actually pertaining to the Jurassic World. On top of that, it actually is a bit of a stretch in the way it brings everyone together. The information given to Sattler, Malcolm, and Grant that gets them to investigate Biosyn is given by a whistleblower within the company who has security clearance and who could have easily done everything that our legacy characters wind up doing here. He could have actually done it right out in the open and no one would have batted an eye towards it, rather than bringing in others without security clearance to go in and sneak around for him. I don't know why they specifically had to do it instead of him. It just didn't make sense to me. And while I appreciate our original trio were included, I think they could have found a better way to rope them in from the start. Also, while I appreciate they try to give more character development to Maisie, and she's handled considerably better here than she was in Fallen Kingdom, which I felt was a thankless role given more attention than it should have got, I still feel like there was a missed opportunity to explore anything truly meaningful with this storyline. Like here, we at least actually dig a little deeper into her backstory and the reason behind her cloning, and I'd argue she's actually more of a compelling character than either Owen or Claire. But still, at the end of the day, ultimately she still feels like just a plot device, and that character development only goes so far. It's certainly better than anything we've gotten from most of the Jurassic World characters, but it ultimately felt like fluff. And it really didn't do much to explore anything meaningful on the subject, which was at the heart of Jurassic Park. She ultimately just felt like a device that our main characters have to get to. Despite the fact that she's treated as being so important, and in this case she is, she's really nothing more than just a plot point that's in service of characters who are ultimately considerably less interesting. And they could have began with, cutting out the locusts. Jurassic World Dominion is by no means a perfect movie. In fact, I don't even think it's a really good movie, as it has some of the same issues that plagued the first two Jurassic World films, including too serious of a tone at times, a lack of exploring anything meaningful thematically, and dull lead characters, on top of the fact that it had some weird logical decisions made. However, there's definitely more of a personality this time around, due to its inclusion of the original Jurassic Park trio and utilizing them well enough, its attempts at more of a tonal balance, its charismatic new supporting characters, and its mindless blockbuster spectacle. While I still wouldn't call it the best way to properly wrap up a franchise that started with such an iconic movie, it makes for some decent B-movie entertainment that I had an enjoyable enough time with. Jurassic World Dominion gets a 6.5 out of 10. So, I just finished up a review series of all the other Jurassic Park and World movies, and now that those are all out of the way, stay tuned, as I'll soon have out a ranking of all 6 movies. But in the meantime, let me know, did you see Jurassic World Dominion, or are you planning to see it, and what were your thoughts? Was this your favorite of the Jurassic World movies? Was it your least favorite? Let me know in the comments below so we can discuss. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, and share it, and for more movie reviews and film discussion, please make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Thanks for watching, everyone, and keep having fun with film.